Under the flickering neon glow of Chicago's financial district, where skyscrapers cast long shadows over hurried footsteps, two orphan brothers, Eli and Noah, sit on a cracked sidewalk. They share a single apple, its red skin worn from a day in Noah's patched backpack. Eli, the older by mere minutes, slices it with a dull pocket knife, ensuring Noah gets the larger half. Their laughter, soft but defiant, cuts through the city's hum, a fragile rebellion against their hunger and loss. Across the street, Victor Hayes, a billionaire cloaked in a tailored overcoat, pauses mid-stride. His life polished, solitary, built on ruthless deals, feels hollow against their warmth. Victor's eyes, usually fixed on stock tickers, linger on the boys. A memory stirs, sharp and unbidden, of a name he buried long ago, Clara Bennett, their aunt, a woman his company discarded. That apple, split with care, becomes a mirror to his past mistakes. What begins as a fleeting glance will unravel a secret, ignite a reckoning, and forge a family from the ashes of regret. In this moment, Chicago's pulse slows, and a story of redemption, sacrifice, and love takes root, ready to change them all forever. The Chicago evening draped itself over the financial district like a heavy velvet curtain, its neon signs buzzing with restless energy. At the base of the Sterling Bank Tower, a monolith of glass and steel, the sidewalk was a patchwork of gum stains and cigarette butts. Here, Eli and Noah Bennett, 10-year-old orphans, claimed their spot. Their worn sneakers dangled over the curb as they sat, shoulders touching, a single apple between them. Eli, with his serious brown eyes and a faded Cubs cap, held the fruit. Its surface bruised from a day jostled in Noah's backpack. Noah, his face brighter, freckles dancing across his nose, hummed a tune he'd heard on a street performer's guitar. Their aunt, Clara Bennett, was still at her second job, cleaning offices until midnight. The boys, used to waiting, made a ritual of these moments, turning scarcity into something sacred. Eli's pocket knife, a relic from their late father, glinted as he sliced the apple. "You take the big half," he said, voice steady despite the hunger gnawing at him. Noah shook his head, pushing it back. "We split even." Always. Their hands met in the middle, dividing the fruit with precision born of practice. They ate slowly, savoring each bite, the juice of fleeting luxury. Around them, bankers in crisp suits streamed past, their eyes fixed on phones or distant taxis, oblivious to the boys' quiet resilience. The city's pulse, honking cabs, clattering construction, seemed to fade when they leaned into each other, their laughter a shield against the world's indifference. Across the street, Victor Hayes stood frozen, his polished loafers rooted to the pavement. At 52, he was a titan of finance, his name etched on plaques in boardrooms across Chicago. His life was a series of calculated moves, mergers, acquisitions, and a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. Yet, as he watched Eli and Noah, something cracked in his carefully curated world. Victor's briefcase hung heavy in his hand, his Bluetooth headset silent for once. He'd passed this corner daily for decades, trained to ignore the homeless, the protesters, the lost. But these boys weren't begging or shouting. They were simply there, their bond a stark contrast to his solitary existence. Victor's gaze lingered on Eli's careful knife work, Noah's gentle nudge. He saw gratitude in their eyes, resilience in their posture, and it stirred a memory he couldn't place. Clara Bennett, the name surfaced like a ghost. She'd worked for him years ago, a junior analyst. Before vanishing from his company's records, Victor's brow furrowed. Had he known her? The boys' faces, so open and unguarded, held a mirror to his own emptiness. He adjusted his scarf, a nervous habit, and stepped closer, drawn by a force he didn't yet understand. "Excuse me," he said, his voice softer than it had been in years. Eli looked up, wary but curious, while Noah grinned through a mouthful of apple. "Hi," Noah said, crumbs on his chin. Victor hesitated, unsure what he sought. "You come here often?" he asked, the question clumsy but earnest. Eli nodded. "It's our spot. Quiet mostly." In that moment, under Chicago's relentless sky, a thread began to weave, fragile but unbreakable, pulling Victor into a story he never expected to live. Victor Hayes stood on the edge of the sidewalk, the Sterling Bank Tower looming behind him like a silent judge. The Chicago wind tugged at his overcoat, but he barely noticed. His eyes fixed on Eli and Noah. The brothers sat cross-legged, their apple halves gone, now sharing a crumpled napkin to wipe sticky fingers. Eli's Cubs cap cast a shadow over his face, but his gaze was sharp, assessing Victor with a mix of caution and curiosity. Noah, less guarded, leaned forward, his sneakers scuffing the pavement. "You working there?" he asked, pointing at the tower's gleaming doors. Victor nodded, caught off guard by the boy's ease. "I do," he said, his voice betraying a warmth he hadn't used in years. Eli tilted his head, studying Victor's tailored suit, the kind that cost more than their aunt's monthly rent. "What's it like?" he asked, not out of envy but genuine interest. Victor paused, the question slicing through his usual defenses. What was it like? A life of boardrooms, late nights, and a penthouse so quiet it echoed? "Busy," he managed, then added, "lonely sometimes." The admission slipped out, raw and unpolished, surprising even himself. Noah's eyes widened, but Eli's softened, as if he understood loneliness in his own small way. The brothers shared a glance. A silent conversation honed by years of reliance on each other. "We're Eli and Noah," Noah said, extending a sticky hand. "I'm older, but only by 6 minutes." Eli rolled his eyes but smiled, a rare crack in his serious demeanor. Victor crouched, ignoring the cold seeping through his trousers, and shook Noah's hand, then Eli's. "Victor Hayes," he said, the name feeling heavy, tied to a legacy of wealth and ruthlessness. He wanted to say more, to ask about their lives, but the words felt intrusive, like trespassing. Instead, he pointed to the empty napkin. "That apple looked good," he said, aiming for lightness. Noah grinned. "Aunt Clara says sharing makes it taste better." Eli nodded, adding, "She says it's not about what you have, but who you're with." The words landed like stones in Victor's chest, their simplicity cutting deeper than any boardroom negotiation. He thought of his own meals, eaten alone at a marble counter. The city's skyline his only company. These boys, with so little, had something he'd lost or perhaps never had. The conversation flowed, tentative but real. Eli spoke of their walks from their aunt's apartment in Pilsen, 15 blocks unless it rained. Noah mentioned their favorite bus driver, who sometimes let them ride free. Victor listened, captivated by their openness, their lack of bitterness despite their struggles. He saw resilience in Eli's steady voice, joy in Noah's quick laugh, and it stirred a longing he couldn't name. As the sky darkened, Eli stood, helping Noah gather their things. "We gotta get home," he said, polite but firm. Victor nodded, rising, his knees stiff from crouching. "See you around?" he asked. Almost hopeful. Noah grinned. "Maybe." As the brothers walked away, their silhouettes small against the city's glow, Victor felt a shift. That brief encounter, born of a shared apple and a moment's pause, had cracked open a door in his heart, one he hadn't known was locked. Victor Hayes sat in his penthouse office, the Chicago skyline a glittering distraction beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The Sterling Bank Tower's top floor was his domain, a fortress of glass and steel where he orchestrated deals that shaped markets. But tonight, his laptop screen held no stock charts or emails. Instead, it displayed an old HR file, the name Clara Bennett in bold at the top. Victor's fingers hovered over the keyboard, his pulse uneven. The memory of Eli and Noah, their apple shared on the sidewalk, had haunted him for days. Their aunt's name, mentioned casually by Noah, had sparked a nagging unease, and now, as he dug through archived records, that unease became a weight. Clara Bennett had been a junior analyst at Sterling Bank 12 years ago, hired fresh from Northwestern University. Her file was sparse but glowing, punctual, sharp, a knack for spotting trends others missed. Victor remembered her vaguely, a young woman with a quick smile, always clutching a binder during meetings. But the file ended abruptly. A dismissal notice, dated March 2013, cited failure to deliver on a critical project. No details, no appeal, just a clinical severing. Victor's jaw tightened. He'd signed off on hundreds of terminations, but this one felt personal, tied to the boys he'd met. He cross-referenced the date, March 2013, a chaotic period of mergers when a rushed client pitch had imploded due to a data error. Victor recalled the fallout. Blame shifted, heads rolled. His IT team had botched a server transfer, but someone lower had taken the fall. Clara. The decision was meant to be temporary, a scapegoat to appease an angry client until the truth surfaced. But the truth never did. Sterling Bank moved on, and Clara was erased, her career sacrificed for expediency. Victor's hands clenched. He hadn't known her well, but he'd approved the dismissal, his signature a scrawl on her ruin. Now, he saw the ripple effects. Eli and Noah, orphaned after their parents' car accident, lived with Clara in a cramped Pilsen apartment. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices, folding laundry for retirees, her dreams of finance buried under survival. Victor pictured her, exhausted, teaching the boys to share an apple, to find joy in scarcity. The boys' resilience, their warmth, was her legacy, forged in the shadow of his company's indifference. Guilt coiled in his chest, sharp and unfamiliar. He built an empire, but at what cost? Clara's file stared back, her ID photo grainy but piercing, young, hopeful, unaware of the betrayal awaiting her. Victor closed the laptop, the city's lights blurring through his window. He thought of Eli's careful knife, Noah's carefree hum. They deserved better, Clara deserved better. But apologies were hollow without action. He didn't know how to fix a decade-old wrong, but the boys' faces, so vivid in his mind, demanded he try. Victor leaned back, the weight of his wealth mocking him. For the first time, he saw his fortune not as power but as a debt. One he owed to a woman he'd wronged and 2 boys who'd unknowingly shown him the cost of his blindness. The path ahead was unclear, but he knew one thing. He couldn't look away again. Victor Hayes stood at his penthouse window, Lake Michigan a dark expanse below, reflecting Chicago's restless glow. The city, his kingdom, felt foreign tonight. Its pulse out of sync with the turmoil in his chest. Clara Bennett's HR file, still open on his desk, was a silent accusation. Her dismissal, a footnote in his empire's history, had reshaped her life and, by extension, Eli and Noah's. The brothers' faces, Eli's steady gaze, Noah's fleeting grin, haunted him, their shared apple a stark contrast to his solitary dinners. Victor, who'd always measured success in dollars, now faced a different ledger, one of human cost. He paced, the polished hardwood creaking under his steps. Clara had been 23, ambitious, a rising star until his signature ended her career. He hadn't known her struggles, pregnancy, loss, raising her sister's sons alone, but he'd played a role in her fall. The boys' lives, defined by scarcity, were tethered to that moment. Eli's worn Cubs cap, Noah's patched backpack. These weren't just signs of poverty, but scars of a system Victor had mastered. He built Sterling Bank on efficiency, but efficiency had erased Clara, and he'd never questioned it. Now, her nephew's resilience exposed his blindness. Victor stopped, gripping the window's edge. He thought of his own life, boardrooms, private jets, a penthouse devoid of laughter. He traded connection for control, believing wealth was enough. But Eli and Noah, with nothing, had something he lacked: purpose, rooted in love. Their aunt's lessons, sharing makes it taste better, it's who you're with, were truths Victor had never learned. He envied their bond, their ability to find joy in an apple split 2 ways. His wealth, once a shield, now felt like a cage, trapping him in a life of hollow victories. Guilt wasn't enough. It was a spark, not a fire. Victor sat, staring at Clara's photo, her eyes defiant despite exhaustion. He couldn't undo the past, but he could act now. What did redemption look like? Not charity. Eli's quiet dignity had taught him that. The boys didn't need pity. They needed opportunity, a chance Clara had been denied. Victor's mind raced. Scholarships, jobs, resources. He had the means, but would it matter without trust? Clara didn't know him, and the boys saw him as a stranger who'd lingered too long. He opened his laptop, searching city programs. Housing aid, education grants, career training. Each link felt like a step towards something larger, a way to repay a debt he hadn't known he owed. But doubt lingered. Could he face Clara? Admit his role in her hardship? The boy's warmth had disarmed him, but Clara's pain might not forgive so easily. Victor closed his eyes, picturing Noah's hum, Eli's careful knife. They were Clara's legacy, proof of her strength. If he could help them, even quietly, it might be a start. The Chicago skyline glittered, indifferent, but inside Victor, a resolve took root. He'd spent a lifetime building walls. Now, he learned to build bridges, starting with 2 boys and a woman whose life he'd unknowingly shattered. The path was daunting, but for the first time, Victor felt awake, alive to a purpose beyond himself. Victor Hayes moved with a quiet urgency, the Chicago dawn painting his office in hues of gold and gray. The Sterling Bank Tower, usually a stage for his triumphs, now felt like a confessional. Clara Bennett's file, a ghost on his desk, spurred him to act. Eli and Noah's faces, their shared apple. Their unspoken strength demanded more than guilt. Victor, a man who'd shaped markets, now sought to reshape lives. But redemption, he knew, required discretion. The boy's dignity, Clara's pride, couldn't be bought with flashy gestures. He began in the shadows, leveraging his wealth to open doors he'd once closed. First, he contacted a rival firm, Meridian Capital, where a friend owed him a favor. Clara, he learned, still cleaned their offices at night. Victor arranged for her reinstatement as an analyst, framing it as a diversity initiative to avoid suspicion. He falsified records to show she'd completed training, ensuring her skills, dormant but sharp, would shine. The job came with benefits, healthcare, stability, things Clara hadn't known in years. Next, he secured scholarships for Eli and Noah through a local nonprofit, covering tuition at a magnet school with programs in astronomy and music, their passions. He masked his involvement, letting the nonprofit take credit. Victor didn't stop there. He researched Pilsen's housing crisis, funneling funds to a community trust to stabilize rents, including Clara's. Each act was a brick in a bridge he hoped to build, but he knew it wasn't enough without connection. He started visiting the boys' sidewalk spot, bringing coffee for himself and cocoa for them, claiming he happened to be passing by. Eli, ever cautious, watched him closely, but Noah's grin welcomed him. They talked about school, the Cubs, the stars Eli loved. Victor listened, learning their world, Clara's late nights, their sick grandmother, the bus they couldn't always afford. These visits became his anchor. One evening, Noah showed him a guitar pick, a gift from a street musician. "I'm gonna play like him someday," he said, eyes bright. Eli, quieter, mentioned a book on constellations he'd borrowed. Victor nodded, hiding the ache in his chest. He wanted to give them everything, lessons, books, a future, but Eli's words echoed. Sharing, not buying, mattered. So, he stayed present, asking questions, laughing at Noah's jokes. Clara remained a mystery, a figure he glimpsed only in the boys' stories. He feared meeting her, knowing his role in her past might unravel everything. Yet, his actions drew scrutiny. Clara, sharp despite her exhaustion, noticed changes, the job offer, the scholarships, the oddly stable rent. She questioned the nonprofit, who mentioned an anonymous donor. Her suspicion grew. A shadow Victor couldn't outrun. He kept visiting, each cocoa cup a small atonement, but the weight of his secret pressed harder. He saw Clara and Eli's resolve, Noah's warmth, and it drove him to do more. Chicago's skyline watched, unyielding, as Victor worked, not for absolution but for the boys' future. He didn't know if Clara would forgive him, or if the boys would understand, but he pressed on, each step a vow to be more than the man who'd signed her dismissal. For Eli, for Noah, for Clara, he'd keep trying, even if it meant facing the truth he'd buried. The Pilsen apartment was a cramped haven, its walls papered with faded floral patterns and dotted with Eli and Noah's drawings. Victor Hayes sat at a wobbly kitchen table, a chipped mug of instant coffee in hand, the air thick with the scent of Clara's homemade tamales. Eli, cross-legged on a threadbare couch, read aloud from a library book about black holes, his voice steady despite the occasional stumble. Noah, sprawled on the floor, strummed an imaginary guitar, humming a tune he'd made up. Clara was at work, her night shift stretching past midnight, leaving the boys with their grandmother, who dozed in a recliner, her breathing labored. Victor, once a stranger, had become a fixture. His visits a quiet ritual born of cocoa cups and sidewalk talks. He'd started small, showing up with snacks or a used astronomy magazine for Eli. Noah, ever open, had invited him inside one rainy evening, and Victor, hesitant, crossed the threshold. The apartment was a world apart from his Lake Michigan penthouse. No marble, no silence, just warmth. Eli watched him at first, wary of this man in a suit, but Victor's questions about stars, music, their dreams, eased the tension. Now, weeks later, they sat together, the boys' chatter filling the room like sunlight. Noah described a school concert, his fingers mimicking chords. "I'll play real good, you'll see," he said, grinning. Eli, softer, showed Victor a sketch of Orion's belt. "It's my favorite," he murmured, trusting Victor with a piece of himself. Victor listened, his heart swelling and aching in equal measure. He saw Clara in their resilience, Eli's quiet strength, Noah's boundless hope. He learned their rhythms, Eli's habit of checking Noah's backpack, Noah's knack for making their grandmother smile. Victor shared stories too, careful ones, his childhood in Evanston, his love for old jazz records, avoiding the wealth that defined him. The boys didn't need his money, they needed him present. And he gave that freely, savoring the chaos of their world. One night, Noah handed him a crayon drawing, Victor as a superhero, Kate billowing, holding a guitar and a star. "That's you," Noah said. Shy but proud, Victor tucked it into his wallet, next to his ID, a treasure worth more than any deal. Clara remained a shadow, her work keeping her distant. Victor feared meeting her. Knowing his secret tied him to her pain. Yet, the boys' trust pushed him forward. He helped with homework, fixed a leaky faucet, sat with their grandmother when her cough worsened. Each act wove him deeper into their lives, a thread he wouldn't cut. Chicago's nights grew colder, but the apartment's warmth held him. He saw his penthouse differently now. Its silence oppressive, its luxury hollow. Eli and Noah had given him something he hadn't known he craved, belonging. But Clara's suspicion lingered, a storm brewing. Victor sensed it in the boys' questions. Why was their rent paid? Why did their school have new books? He deflected, but the truth loomed, a reckoning he couldn't avoid. For now, he stayed. Laughing as Noah mimicked a rock star, nodding as Eli explained supernovas. The boys were his compass, guiding him toward a life he'd never planned. One of connection, not conquest. In their small, vibrant world, Victor found purpose, even as the shadow of Clara's past grew closer. The Pilsen street was quiet. Save for the distant hum of a CTA bus and the faint glow of streetlights cutting through the November chill. Victor Hayes stood outside Clara Bennett's apartment, his breath visible in the crisp air. He'd been summoned. Clara's text, curt and urgent, had demanded he come. His heart pounded, the weight of his secret heavier than ever. Inside, Clara waited, her night shift canceled, giving her time to unravel the mystery of her sudden fortune. Victor, who'd spent weeks weaving himself into Eli and Noah's lives, knew this moment would test everything. He knocked, the sound sharp against the stillness, and Clara opened the door, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and betrayal. "You're Victor Hayes," she said, her voice low, cutting. "Not just some guy who likes my nephews. You're the Victor Hayes from Sterling Bank." The apartment was dim, Eli and Noah asleep in their shared room, their grandmother at a clinic. Clara stood by the kitchen table, papers strewn across it. A job offer from Meridian Capital, scholarship letters, a housing trust notice. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but fury. "You did this," she said, pointing. "Why? What do you want?" Victor swallowed, his throat dry. He'd rehearsed this, but her gaze, piercing, raw, unraveled him. "I owe you the truth," he began, voice steady but soft. 12 years ago, I signed your dismissal at Sterling. A botched deal, a scapegoat needed. You were it. I didn't know you, didn't question it. I was wrong." Clara's face tightened, her breath catching. She was 35 now, her youth worn by years of toil, but her eyes held the same fire he'd seen in her old ID photo. "You ruined me," she said, voice breaking. "I was pregnant, alone, and you took my future. Now you think money fixes it?" Victor flinched, her words a blade. He wanted to explain his guilt, his awakening, but she pressed on. "You used my boys to ease your conscience. How dare you?" Victor stood, hands open, defenseless. "I saw Eli and Noah, their strength, your strength in them. It woke me up. I wanted to help." "Not by forgiveness." Clara laughed, bitter. "Help? You lied. You played savior without asking." The room felt smaller, the air thick with her pain. Victor thought of Eli's sketches. Noah's guitar pick, the trust he'd built. "I stayed because they matter to me," he said. "Not to erase the past, but to build something now." Clara's eyes searched his, looking for deceit. She found none, but her anger held. "Get out," she said, pointing to the door. Victor nodded, respecting her rage. "I'll go, but I'm here if you need me. For you, for them." He left, the door's click echoing in his chest. Outside, Chicago's cold bit at him, but Clara's words burned deeper. He'd expected her anger, but its depth shook him. Yet, he couldn't walk away. Eli and Noah, asleep inside, were his anchor. Clara's pain was real, but so was his resolve. He'd face her again, not as a benefactor, but as a man owning his mistakes, hoping one day she'd see his heart. not just his signature on her ruin. The night was fractured by sirens, their wail slicing through Pilsen's quiet streets. Victor Hayes sprinted toward Clara Bennett's apartment, his coat flapping. Heart hammering. A neighbor's frantic call had woken him. Fire in the building, smoke billowing from the third floor where Eli and Noah slept. Chicago's skyline blurred as he ran, the cold air burning his lungs. He'd been up late, wrestling with Clara's confrontation, her anger still raw in his mind. Now, fear eclipsed guilt. The boys, his boys, as he dared to call them, were in danger, and nothing else mattered. The apartment block came into view, flames licking the windows, a crowd gathering under flashing red lights. Victor pushed through, ignoring a firefighter's shout. Smoke poured from the stairwell, thick and acrid, stinging his eyes. Clara was at the hospital with her mother, leaving Eli and Noah alone. He pictured their faces, Eli's steady calm, Noah's bright grin, and resolve surged. They're on the third floor. He yelled to a paramedic, then ducked inside, coughing as heat pressed against him. The stairs creaked, embers falling like snow. Victor's life, his wealth, his penthouse, meant nothing if he lost them. He climbed, driven by a love he hadn't known he could feel. On the third floor, the hallway was a furnace, smoke curling like a living thing. Victor crouched, calling their names. Eli, Noah. A faint cry answered, Noah's voice, choked with fear. Victor followed it, kicking open Clara's door. The living room was ablaze, flames devouring the couch where Eli read. In the bedroom, he found them, huddled by the window, Eli shielding Noah, their faces smudged with soot. Victor, Noah sobbed, reaching out. Eli's eyes, wide with terror, met his. The window was stuck, the fire closing in. Victor's heart steadied. He wouldn't fail them. He wrapped his coat around them, pulling them close. Stay low, he rasped, coughing. The hallway was a tunnel of heat, but he carried Noah, Eli gripping his hand. A beam groaned above, and Victor shoved them forward as it collapsed, grazing his shoulder. Pain seared, but he kept moving, the boy's weight his only focus. Down the stairs, through choking smoke. He stumbled into the night, firefighters rushing to them. Oxygen masks covered the boys' faces, their hands still clutching his. Victor fell to his knees, gasping, blood trickling from his arm. But they were safe. Clara arrived, her face ashen, running from the hospital. She saw Eli and Noah, then Victor, battered but alive. Her eyes, once filled with rage, softened, tears spilling. You saved them, she whispered, voice breaking. Victor nodded, too exhausted to speak. Eli hugged him, Noah clinging to his side. The crowd faded, the sirens dulled. Only their bond remained. Clara's hand touched his shoulder, a gesture of gratitude, not forgiveness, but a start. Victor had risked everything, not for redemption but for love. The fire had taken the apartment, but it forged something stronger. Trust, fragile but real. Chicago's dawn broke, pale and hopeful, as Victor held the boys, knowing he'd found his purpose. Not in wealth but in the family he'd fought to save. Victor Hayes sat in his Lake Michigan penthouse, the once pristine space now cluttered with signs of life. A telescope, Eli's gift, stood by the window, aimed at the Chicago sky. Noah's guitar pick rested on the coffee table, next to a crayon drawing of the three of them under a starry night. The fire had changed everything, stripping away the last of Victor's old self. His shoulder, bandaged from the collapsing beam, ached, but the pain was a reminder of what he'd gained. Eli and Noah, safe with Clara in temporary housing, were no longer just a debt to repay. They were his family, chosen through sacrifice and love. The billionaire who'd once lived for deals now lived for them. The weeks after the fire blurred into moments of connection. Victor visited daily, bringing books for Eli, sheet music for Noah, and groceries for Clara. His penthouse, once a sterile fortress, became their refuge. Eli set up his telescope, pointing out constellations with a quiet pride that made Victor's heart swell. Noah strummed chords on a borrowed guitar, his laughter filling the silence Victor had once endured. Clara, still guarded, joined them, her presence a bridge between past pain and present hope. Victor saw her strength in every glance, her resilience a mirror to the boy's own. He was changing, shedding the skin of the man who'd signed Clara's dismissal. Boardrooms felt hollow now, their stakes trivial compared to Eli's homework or Noah's first recital. Victor started delegating at Sterling Bank, freeing time for what mattered. He learned to cook tamales with Clara, laughing at his clumsy attempts. He read to the boys at night, Eli's astronomy books and Noah's comic strips, their heads resting against him. His wealth, once a shield, became a tool not to buy forgiveness but to secure their future. He funded a music program at their school, ensured Clara's new job had flexibility, and found a permanent home in Pilsen. Closer to their roots, Clara's trust grew slowly, her anger softening into cautious gratitude. One evening, she handed Victor a photo from before the fire, Eli and Noah, grinning, with his superhero drawing pinned to the wall. "They love you," she said, her voice steady. Victor nodded, throat tight. "I love them too," he replied, meaning every word. He wasn't their father, but he was theirs mentor, protector, friend. His penthouse, once empty, echoed with their voices, its cold edges warmed by their presence. Chicago's skyline, visible through his window, no longer felt like a trophy. Victor saw it now as a backdrop to their story, a city where he'd found redemption not in grand gestures, but in small, steady acts. He kept the drawing in his wallet, a talisman of his new life. The man who'd once measured success in dollars now measured it in moments, Eli's shy smile, Noah's off-key songs, Clara's quiet nods. He was no longer alone, no longer defined by his past. Victor Hayes, billionaire, had become Victor, the man who showed up, who stayed, who loved. In the boy's eyes, he saw his purpose reflected, clear and unshakable. A life rebuilt not on wealth but on the family he'd chosen to call his own. The Pilsen rooftop was a patchwork of tar paper and hope, bathed in the lavender glow of a Chicago dusk. Victor Hayes sat on a creaky lawn chair, a blanket draped over his shoulders, the city's hum a distant lullaby. Beside him, Clara Bennett sipped coffee from a thermos, her face softened by the fading light. Eli and Noah sprawled on a quilt, their telescope aimed at the first stars. A pizza box, greasy and half-empty, lay between them, the air rich with the scent of pepperoni and possibility. The fire had taken their old home, but this moment, high above the skyline, built a new one, bound by choice and love. Eli adjusted the telescope, his Cubs cap tilted back, eyes bright with discovery. "That's Sirius," he said, pointing, brightest star in the sky. Noah, strumming a borrowed guitar, grinned. "Bet it's a rock star up there, playing for aliens." Clara laughed, a sound Victor cherished, free of the weight she'd carried for years. He watched her, marveling at her strength. Once a junior analyst, now a senior one at Meridian, her career reborn through his quiet amends. The boys, thriving in their new school, carried her legacy, Eli's curiosity, Noah's joy. Victor felt it too, a pride deeper than any deal he'd closed. They'd come far since the fire. Clara's new apartment, secured with Victor's discreet help, was a fresh start, its walls already covered with the boys' art. Victor was a constant now, not a savior but a partner, sharing dinners, homework, dreams. Tonight, they'd climbed to the roof to celebrate Noah's first guitar recital, his small hands mastering chords that echoed his heart. Eli read a poem he'd written, his voice steady, about stars that guide lost ships home. Victor listened, his bandaged shoulder a badge of the night he'd saved them, the night they'd saved him. Clara caught his eye, her gaze warm, forgiving. "You're good for them," she said, low enough for only him to hear. Victor nodded, throat tight. "They're good for me," he replied. He thought of his penthouse, now a second home for sleepovers, its silence banished by their laughter. He'd once lived for himself. Now, he lived for them. The boys called him Vic, a name that felt earned, not by wealth but by presence, band-aids applied. Stories shared, promises kept. Clara's trust, hard-won, was his greatest victory. As the sky darkened, Eli pointed out constellations, Noah humming softly. Victor leaned back. The stars a map of their journey, guilt, fire, redemption, love. Chicago's lights flickered below, a city that had watched him change. He wasn't their father, but he was theirs, and they were his. Clara reached for his hand, a fleeting touch, but it anchored him. They weren't a traditional family, no shared blood or history, but they were unshakable, built on choices made under these same stars. The boys' laughter rose, pure and free, as Noah strummed a silly tune. Victor smiled, his heart full. This rooftop, this moment, was home, not a place, but people. In Eli's wonder, Noah's song, Clara's quiet strength, Victor found his truth. Love, not wealth, builds legacies that endure. In the glow of a shared apple, a fire's ashes. and a starry Chicago night. Victor, Clara, Eli, and Noah teach us that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to repair what's broken. Victor's journey, from a billionaire blind to his impact to a man who risked his life for two boys, shows that redemption begins with accountability. His signature once shattered Clara's dreams, but his actions, quiet and selfless, rebuilt them. Eli and Noah, with their resilience and love, reveal that scarcity can forge abundance when shared with heart. Clara's strength, rising from betrayal to trust, proves that forgiveness is a choice, not a debt. Together, they build a family, not from blood, but from presence, proving that love, given freely, heals even the deepest wounds. Life's truest riches lie in showing up, owning mistakes, and choosing connection over comfort. Every step Victor took, Cocoa Cups, a rescue, a rooftop laugh, was a brick in a legacy of care, a reminder that we all owe something to those we've wronged, knowingly or not. This story asks us to look closer, to see the faces we pass, and to act before it's too late. So, let this tale linger. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, a friend, a stranger, a heart ready to heal. In the comments, tell us, what moment in your life called you to make amends? Your voice matters, weaving you into our community of storytellers. Subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and join us for more stories that spark hope and change. Every video we craft pours days of heart into reminding you that love, not wealth, builds futures. Be part of this journey, choose to stay, to care, to connect. Let's inspire each other to live not for ourselves, but for those who share our path, under the same stars, in the same fleeting, beautiful world.